Thank you. All right, we're going to call this meeting to order. Welcome this morning. Hope everyone had a happy holidays, and we'll have roll call, please.
Mr. Durham?
Present.
Dr. Ernest?
Here.
Dr. Freitas?
Present.
Mr. Gastineau?
Here.
Mr. Mapes?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here on the phone.
Superintendent McCormick? Ms. Moe? Ms. Rechler?
Here.
Mr. Walker? Mr. Watts?
Here.
Roll call complete.
All right, please join me in a salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next thing would be approval of the agenda. I would entertain a motion for that.
So moved.
Second. Been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Statement of the chair. BJ, do you have anything you would like to say?
Just happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you. Same back at you. Any board member with comments? Okay, seeing none. I believe we do not have any general public comments. Am I still correct on that?
That's correct.
Thank you. So we will move to our new business action, which is our only action area, and I believe we're going to start with public comment directly related to that, correct?
Correct.
And I would just add that with direct public comment, that is a 5-minute limit, and we will give you a 30-second warning as we work through those. And with that, we will start. Tim, if you want to call those off.
First up, Gail Zaharalis.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Board. My name's Gail Zaharalis. I'm with the Indiana State Teachers Association, and I rise today to just call for more meaningful and broad-based input from practitioners in impacted fields and changes going forward to the current process that exists in Indiana law concerning the approval and funding of the CTE course list, as well as expansion of the grounds for appeal. The issue that brings us here today is certainly the course categories and funding list. As we read it, IC 2043-87.5 stipulates that the Department of Workforce Development categorizes each CTE program and that those designations must be reviewed and approved by the State Board of Ed. The DWD is given a deadline of December 1 of each year to send this list over to you all, and the law goes on to read that by January 1, you shall review and approve the list at a public meeting. So all of the activity around the course list and funding occurs between December 1 and January 1, hardly an opportune time for educators to weigh in. It is our understanding that this is a very formula-driven process with, in effect, little subjectivity. But essentially, the public, and more importantly, the stakeholders, are given just a few days to see the list, digest the list, drop everything they are doing to attend a State Board of Ed meeting that is likely within a week of that list being made public, and then comment on the list. And then the State Board of Ed believes it has no authority to do anything but review and approve the list by January 1. There is an appeal in statute, but that appeal is limited to whether the categorization of a particular CTE course is based upon the accuracy of the employment demand data for the region. Notably, an appeal is not available if a particular course is altogether eliminated from CTE funding. So the question becomes, if this list is the list, no matter what, then our attendance here today is called into question because those who advocate for their program's value may not be impactful to anyone in power right now. From the standpoint of a practitioner and frankly the public, this is a process that is unnecessarily rushed and murky. And ISTA recognizes that to change this process at this time will require legislative action. Fortunately, we have a General Assembly convening here in a few days. Here are the changes we believe should occur. The timeline in the law and the steps to reach an approved list of courses and funding are unworkable and too rushed, and they lack transparency. Give the State Board of Ed more time and authority to modify this list based on a series of circumstances you all discuss. At the very least, some agency in power must be required to include a programmatic impact statement with the list concerning the likely programmatic consequences that will ensue subsequent to new recommendations, an impact on both the courses that are being defunded or decreased and the courses that are seeing increases in funding. And expand the grounds for appeal to include arguments by the local district as to why a particular course that is not on the funding list anymore should be included for that district. In essence, special circumstances. I don't honestly know how much time I have left, but I did want to mention one thing. Last week, Channel 13 did a feature on the dearth of caregivers in assisted living facilities. And it occurred to me, knowing that this was coming up, that those foundational courses that are being defunded in this month for the future are the very types of courses that in that industry are necessary, important, related, critical, relevant. Adult roles and responsibilities, interpersonal skills, and consumer economics. And so I guess, again, we're not totally sure how this list gets determined, but it does seem to us that there is a career pathway emanating from some of these courses that are being defunded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anna Carlock.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Hannah Carlock, the Director of Public Policy with the ARC of Indiana. The ARC of Indiana just want to make a couple of brief comments regarding the CTE funding memo. Just a reminder, the ARC of Indiana specifically is concerned in making sure that students who receive special education services have the same opportunities to earn a high school diploma and have options after high school for post-secondary and career pathways as their peers who do not utilize special education services. First, we want to publicly thank Brian for his time in speaking with us to answer our questions and hear our concerns. We appreciate the willingness of the State Board and their staff to work with stakeholders. We understand the thought around the CTE memo and understand that with limited resources, sometimes changes do need to be made. We do, however, want to express our strong support of the foundation courses. We believe the majority of those courses assist in developing well-rounded students that are prepared for post-secondary careers and other options, and that should be something we want for every student. Furthermore, we think some of these foundation courses help students gain compassion and interest in working in some professions, and most of those professions are seeing a crisis in such a low workforce. It is our understanding that these foundation classes will remain a part of the course catalog so that those schools will still be able to offer them. Again, we know these courses are essential for many of the students receiving special education services, and we certainly don't want or need any further barriers for them to access classes and earn a high school diploma. Thank you again for sharing your time with me this morning.
Thank you.
John Hurley.
Thank you to the board for allowing this meeting today, and I did want to thank especially Dr. McCormick for informing the general public about this. She has elevated people above political party, and that's a feat for which all public servants should strive to attain. Said, my name is John Hurley, and I'm a career and technical educator in Spencer County. I'm asking you today to maintain the funding for the foundational courses. Our job as educators are to meet students where they are, and this state funding for the courses helps that happen. In my district, our Family and Consumer Science program will be directly impacted by this reallocation of funds. Currently, our teacher for that program actually covers nearly a third of her own salary from the funding that would be moved to other areas. This is a major factor in any school district with any career and technical education program, particularly ones that have received little or no new funding from the state budget. Moving these funds would likely give cause to these small school districts to eliminate needed programs, as was just testified from the lady from ARC. This appears to be yet another effort by appointed members of the board to defund smaller school districts, thereby forcing them into difficult program and personnel decisions. For those willing to listen, I do ask, what is next? What other program will lose its support from the state level? Will technology or agriculture education suffer the same fate? And will my students and the community lose essential educational opportunities because of the decisions of the board and the State House? Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Lori Holcomb.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing us to speak today. My name is Lori Holcomb, and I'd like to address the memo in regards to what's best for high school students. I teach Family and Consumer Sciences and typically work with 120 students per semester. Within my coursework, students learn content that prepares them for upper-level courses, allows them to explore content-related careers, teaches them employability skills, provides them with laboratory settings, and provides them with the building blocks to allow students to obtain nationally recognized credentials. Last year, I had 38 students to pass certifications. Up until a month ago, I thought we were right on track. However, with the release of the funding memo, I've learned that these courses have been cut. So these courses are nutrition and wellness, child development, and interpersonal relationships, and they're designated foundational. And obviously the recommendation was for foundational funding to go into upper level concentrator courses. However, I feel like they have failed to recognize that the 2021 DOE course titles and descriptions actually identifies these courses as introductory. They are actually the introductory courses for 9 of our career and tech ed specific programs. I do think that asking students to commit to a pathway without having their introductory course is not in their best interest. So we should not be denying students the building blocks to make informed decision-making and to make informed decisions about their career choices and their ability to gain critical content and employability skills. I also believe that with the defunding of these courses, we'll see a decline in certification pass rates. In my 20 years of teaching, I've never been asked to give an exam where I had to actually get rid of a semester's worth of learning and content. Aside from removing the opportunities that the memo has already done, it seems to oversimplify a school's ability to offer concentrator courses and capture students into those classes. The recommendation states that schools are going to chase funding. I'm not sure that that's in the best interest of our students either. If we do place students in concentrator courses just because of funding, they're going to be foregoing a lot of other learning opportunities. These classes are offered during their junior and senior year. During that time, kids are fulfilling the needs for academic honors diplomas. They're pursuing band, music, foreign language, and specialty course offerings. Some students have to make up courses from their underclassmen years that they may have failed. Some students are simply taking study halls because they're involved in work after school and or extracurriculars. So again, I feel like if we're just striving to place students in concentrated courses, we're actually losing a lot of learning opportunities and denying that to students. So in closing, when you're looking at this memo, please consider the loss that it represents. I ask that you recommend changes to better serve all high school students and do so in a way that does not deny them any learning opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brittany Clower.
Thank you. I'm here representing myself as a CTE teacher. I'm an agriculture teacher, but I'm here to speak on behalf of the FACS teachers. CTE funding has been a great concern for all Indiana teachers. FACS courses have played a vital role in all CTE courses, not just in FACS and their pathway. These fundamental courses are just that, a foundation for student learning. While in high school, I would have made a negative impact on the FACS retention numbers because after taking one course, I did not continue on with the FACS courses. I found a passion for agriculture. The skills I learned in my foundation FACS courses allowed me to excel in interpersonal skills and help build relationships through agriculture education. These courses are relevant to not only CTE courses, but in life. I urge the State Board of Education to work with the DWD to reevaluate the FLAME scores to decrease the wide gap in CTE funding from $200 to $1,080. Just as one of my colleagues said earlier, schools are chasing money. It happens because we are desperate for money. There are more and more schools that are popping up. There are more charter schools that are popping up, and we are going to have to compete for every dollar. With the cap being at $130 million, it's going to just get worse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Patricia DeVille.
Good morning. On behalf of Randall Central School Corporation, which is in Winchester, Indiana, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Pat Neville, and I appreciate your time. I'm from a small school corporation, and a funding cut would diminish much of what we offer in our school corporation. It would limit the opportunities of the course pathways for our students. Limiting this funding would impact many of our students, from the higher level college bound to our special needs student. We are just simply requesting that you give us more time to show you the need and the impact that cutting this program's funding would hurt. These courses, as many of our fellow speakers have said, provide the foundation, but also they directly relate to all the other courses that are within a school corporation. Many students make a connection between what they're studying in other areas and disciplines, and they bring it back to the courses that we have, and vice versa. It makes sense to them. It makes a connection. Personally, we touch students in so many aspects of their lives with our courses. These beginning foundational courses is a connection that we make with students beginning in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, as they are struggling to make sense of this world. Please consider the flexibility that we're willing to make, that our school corporations are willing to make for our students, not only for their current needs, but for their future needs. A decrease in this funding would greatly affect their future impact. Thank you for your brief moments.
Thank you.
That was the last public comment.
Okay. Thank you. That completes public comment. I believe now we have a, we're gonna welcome PJ McGrew back to the podium, Director of the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, to give us an overview of what we have here before us. Thanks, PJ, for being here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Hope you all had a happy holiday and are preparing for a happy new year. Before I give a brief overview of the CTE course funding process, I'd like to take just a moment to address a few changes that were made this year that have drawn attention today and in recent weeks. I'm sure, like myself, you all have received numerous emails and concerns over over some of this, but we did prepare a one-page funding memo that came out from the cabinet. We worked with other state agencies on putting that out. You all should have received a copy of that along with members of the field and the Principals Association, Teachers Association, Superintendents Association as well. And I believe the Department of Ed also shared that funding memo in their weekly Sam's and Pam's update. When the Governor's Workforce Cabinet was created in 2018, we were charged with reviewing career and technical education. As a result of that, in October of 2018, we made a series of recommendations regarding CTE. One of those recommendations was to shift funding from the foundational courses. So there were 5 foundational courses: consumer economics, adult roles and responsibilities, interpersonal relationships, nutrition and wellness, and child development, some of which we have heard comment on today. That shift was to the more advanced courses. So you'll see 2 different funding levels now, level 1 and level 2 courses. And that was really to incentivize schools to offer the experiences along a student's pathway that really align with other policy changes that were happening at the state level, like graduation pathways. It was not meant to devalue any of those courses. It was really actually to highlight how valuable they were to all students, not just those students that were pursuing career and technical education. I think we heard today that there are a number of students that don't necessarily pursue CTE that enroll in those courses. If we look at historic data, that data will show only about half of those students that enroll in those foundational courses actually persist to a level 1 advanced course in CTE, and 17% advance to the level 2 course now that aligns with the new graduation pathways. With all of that being said, we're happy, my team, since we shifted the CTE Perkins team under the Workforce Cabinet, happy to answer any questions from the board members or the general public at a later date and time on all of those CTE questions. With that, I'd like to get to the presentation and hopefully highlight the process in general, and then be able to answer any questions you all have about how that works. So, CTE courses are broken down into 2 different types of funding categories that are outlined statutorily. There are flat rate funded courses, and then there are also credit-based funded courses. Examples of the flat rate funded courses include Preparing for Colleges and Careers, which is funded at $150 per enrollment. The introductory courses, so Introduction to Manufacturing is an example of that, and those are funded at $300 per enrollment. And then Work-Based Learning is another example of a flat rate funded course, and that funding actually increased this year from $150 per enrollment to $500 per enrollment. The credit-based funding courses, so those are all, we have a credit range that these courses can be offered, anywhere from 1 to 3 credits per semester, and they are broken down into 6 categories. There's high value level 1, high value level 2, moderate value level 1 and 2, and then less than moderate value level 1 and level 2. Courses that are outlined within a Perkins 4 or 5 pathway sequence are placed into those 6 categories, and we'll see that the level 2 courses receive 1.5 times the amount that the level 1 courses do, as outlined by the legislation that passed last year. The Department of Workforce Development uses an occupational ranking methodology that looks at 3 overarching variables to place those courses into those designations. So there is short-term demand, which looks at our 2-year occupational projections, long-term demand, which looks at 10-year occupational projections, and then wages are also a factor. Indiana is a part of a consortium of states that utilize a common methodology to look at short and long-term projections. So this is not something that we just do behind closed doors, but we are actually a part of a national consortium that looks at those things. From there, the courses are placed into the designations less than moderate value, or high value, based upon the occupational rankings for which a course prepares students. Now, when these courses were, or the occupations were placed into those courses, we did work with educators out in the field to look at what occupations that specific course would prepare those students. So educators were used in that process. From there, the courses receive a level 1 or level 2 designation based upon whether or not they're the first, second, or a supplemental course within a Perkins concentrator sequence. Guidance regarding Perkins 4 and 5 can be found on our website. Here's a link to this. I shared this presentation with Brian. It should go online so anyone watching in the public can get on and look at that concentrator guidance that was actually released by the Department of Ed last February. You'll see that it breaks down the concentrator sequences by cohort. So any students that are graduating before 2023 when graduation pathways kick in can still utilize the Perkins 4 sequences. Schools can opt into Perkins 5 sequences earlier if they want to, and our students that are graduating in 2023, this year's freshmen, must use the Perkins 5 sequences. And we have links to those pathway sequences on our website as well. Based upon some conversations with state board members, we're going to go in and in those, once the funding is approved, put the funding levels next to all of the courses to make it easier for schools to be able to see the funding for the courses in the specific pathway. And we'll share that with the state board and the field as well once we complete that task, again, once the funding is approved. As was mentioned earlier, Indiana Code 2043-87.5 outlines this process. The Department of Workforce Development uses that funding methodology, that occupational methodology I mentioned earlier, to place the courses into the designations. And also all of the categories are actually outlined in statute as well. And then that comes to the board for approval. A couple of just general statements on CTE funding. The total amount of CTE funding is based upon total enrollments in CTE funded courses. Schools can then use that funding however they see fit. It's a part of tuition support. And so for this upcoming school year that we're talking about today, the 2020-2021 school year, that amount of CTE funding has actually increased to $130 million out of the $7.5 billion. It's also outlined that there is a cap on that $130 million. So any money that above and beyond that $130 million in the courses are reduced at a pro rata amount accordingly. So to get back down to that 130. I am happy to answer any questions that you all might have regarding the process or what's in front of you today.
Anybody, any questions for PJ?
And PJ, it's not a question as much as a statement. And I think that DWD has to remember that, as we're looking at courses for kids in the CTE areas, there are things that may not lead down to directly a job, but has more to do about the well-being of families in the state of Indiana. And a lot of the courses that are now not funded lead for our students to be successful family members, to be caregivers, to run household budgets. And there's value to that. And I think that's what we're hearing from people, is that even in Perry Township, this is about a $52,000 loss to us, because we have a lot of students who really don't have a great foundation of what those families should look like and how to be successful family members. So as DWD looks at this in the future, I think they have to remember you can't public policy students' interests and passions. And we have to make certain that students have avenues to be successful at whatever they want to do once they leave the K-12 system. And at times these foundational courses are things that are going to make them be successful members of society.
Yep. Pat, I don't disagree, but I do think that calling out the Department of Workforce Development on this is not necessarily a fair statement either.
You bring the recommendation to us.
They bring that recommendation to you all, but it was the Workforce Cabinet that took that recommendation to the legislature, and looking at the foundation courses and how they were placed in CTE pathways, and I think also the fact that they were valuable to all students, as you mentioned, and the intentionality behind the CTE incentive funding, generally when it was initially created, was for career and technical education. And when we look at how students were enrolling in those foundational courses, whether they were pursuing those pathways or not, and also to align with the graduation pathway. So, I don't know that the Department of Workforce Development following statute and placing those courses in the funding categories was necessarily fair, but a point well taken.
As we look into the future, I think we have to consider, that's my point, as not everything's going to lead to a job that's been funded for years and years and years with CTE dollars. And then to make this kind of a change, I realize we have a 6-month gap here before we set up our budgets, but we also now have to look at a whole lot of things within the 9 through 12 world about career pathways and the transition from Perkins 4 to Perkins 5, and there's a lot. And it's just one that DWD has to be aware of the impact of that into the K-12 world, and that's all I'm asking for you to look at.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is a little bit on the titles of the courses. It says that we're covering intro courses, but some of these courses that have been deemed foundational seem to be intro courses to career pathways that we are supporting. And so like in other courses, like Intro to Ag is covered, but like the food and wellness course isn't because it's not called intro. Is it just a matter of semantics that if we...
No, it's how historically we've looked at those courses. So historically, there have been those 5 foundational courses that I mentioned earlier, and then some of those courses primarily. So we look at child development and nutrition and wellness. They actually have introductory courses that are funded at an introductory level and have been for a number of years. So I think it's looking at the enrollments in those courses, where they are in the pathways, but then also the fact that there are still introductory courses for each of those.
BJ, I believe you had some questions.
Yes, sir. BJ, how are you?
Great, BJ. Hope you had a great holiday.
One of mine is, I want to make sure I understand how the flame rating works. But I believe the flame rating is what we use to place the courses into the designations, correct?
That is correct.
Is there a rationale, because I know that we go in and tie jobs to these courses. Is there a rationale for how those jobs are metric used, for how those jobs are selected? And could you kind of go through what that process looks like for the jobs that are chosen to make these courses to where they come out to fall into the high, medium, or low?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that. So the credit-based funded courses are the only courses that actually receive an occupational ranking. So when we look at the flat rate funded courses, the introductory courses, preparing for colleges and careers, or work-based learning, those are set aside, and we don't look at the occupational ranking there. There is a national course crosswalk to occupations that's used as a baseline. But then, as I mentioned before, when we did this for the first time a few years ago, we brought in educators to actually look at how those courses were preparing students for occupations, and if things were missed within that crosswalk, then they were placed into those courses. Did that answer your question,
Okay.
BJ?
Absolutely. And then the second one is two-part. How often are those jobs that are tied to those ratings updated? And the second part would be with wage and demand. Are those treated equally when they're placed into categories?
So we look at those quite often for CTE funding purposes. The statute outlines that we update those rankings every 2 years. And then as far as the wage and demand, so I mean, it really is a 3-part formula. So as I mentioned before, short-term demand, which is 2-year demand, long-term demand, which is 10-year, and then looking at the wages on top of that. So most of the time when people talk about the methodology, we say that it's, double weighting the demand, because we're looking at 2 pieces of demand and 1 wage.
And then final question, the $130 million cap, is that a figure that you are comfortable with? And what is the process if the funds that are requested exceeds that $130 million?
Yeah, so that number, going back probably when I first started BJ 5 years ago now, 5.5 years ago, the number that was outlined really as an earmark within tuition support for CTE funding hovered around 100 million. So we've seen an increase there over the last 5 years up to that 130 million cap that they put in place now. I will say, so the process by which what will happen if we exceed that 130 million was just each course will be reduced proportionally. So, if we exceed it by $5 million, we would take the enrollments for all the courses and divide that down until we have a number that gets back down to that 130 million, as statute currently outlines with that cap.
And then one final question, I apologize. The courses that are offered, the jobs that we tie these to for the flame rating, have we gone to those CTE course people that are offering these CTE courses to make sure that what the jobs that we are aligning this flame rating to are tied to the CTE courses that are being offered in the state? So to make it much simpler than what I just did, the courses that are offered, have we aligned those to say, okay, this is the courses that are being taught, this is the jobs that end in those courses, that we're not just selecting jobs that fall in that foundation without aligning that to the courses that are truly being offered?
I think that's part of the two-part process in looking at that SIP to SOC crosswalk that the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out and helps with. And I believe if you look at ONET, you can actually find that SIP to SOC crosswalk. But then also in bringing in the educators to look at what those courses we're actually preparing students for, and having that occupational list and being able to place those occupations within those courses. That was the point in going through that process, BJ. I do want to mention that I think, one of the things that we do have in place is that appeals process for all of these credit-based funding courses that looks at the regional inflection of, the occupational demand and the wages, so that schools can go through, and if they believe that that flame ranking does not accurately reflect what is happening at a regional level, they can appeal DWD. DWD will run that methodology based upon where that school is located, and if it moves the course into a different funding category, then that course will be funded appropriately, all based upon that regional demand and wage.
Okay, thank you, sir. That's all I have, Byron.
Thank you. Anyone else on the phone, just so I don't miss someone?
Yes, Byron, how are you? Good morning, Tony Walker.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Tony.
And I do have a question. I just want to just first say I concur with what Pat said earlier, but I just want to add a little bit to that, because I am uncomfortable with the idea that we may not be valuing these foundational courses at the level that I feel the state should value them. Now, I fully understand we don't really have anything to do with that. That was legislation that moved those foundational courses from the CTE category. But at the end of the day, it does create a reality whereby very important courses that used to be eligible for additional state funding are now not going to be eligible for that funding, and these districts are going to have to find a way to either find additional money to keep those courses, or they're going to eliminate those courses. And while I understand the importance of trying to align education with, at the end of that process, there's a job, there's a lot of tea leaf reading going on with that process, okay? I mean, we may think that we can look at a third grader and think that we're preparing them for a job that may exist 10 years from now, but we really aren't sure about that. And it's not just for a third grader. You really can't be sure about that for an 8th grader. And you may not even be able to be sure about that for a 10th grader, to be quite frank with you. But what we do know is that all of these kids are going to need to know how to eat properly, eat nutritiously, how to take care of their physical body, how to do all these other types, how to prepare food, how to exercise, or to do all the other types of what we're calling, I guess, foundational course work, foundational course skills that they'll need to have just to survive as human beings. And like Pat said, be good citizens and take care of themselves. That is equally as important, if not more important, as preparing kids for jobs. So although I understand that this may not technically fit within the CTE structure, I hope that the state would come up with some mechanism to provide additional funding to school districts to make sure these courses continue to be offered. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Tony. Anyone else on the phone? Anyone else here?
I would just like to add, off of what Tony and Pat said, someone who's in the classroom, both at Pike and Hamilton Southeastern, a lot of our students absolutely love these classes. And I get what Tony just said. I'm just giving my 2 cents here. Someone on the front lines. I mean, for some of my students, this is like the class they look forward to. And it lights that fire and gives them purpose going to school. As an old wrestling coach, I just spend so much time teaching my kids proper nutrition because they didn't understand proper nutrition. And I just think, as we look forward down the road, yes, there are certain skills we want our kids to learn, but if our kids can't functionally move, if they're obese, we have a huge obesity epidemic, I think a big role of our schools is to teach morals and standards and values, and nutrition and childhood development, I think, are a big part of that. So getting on the bandwagon here, I just think that as we go forward, we really need to emphasize the whole child, the development of the whole student, and the fact that if we can teach our kids at a young age proper nutrition and obviously how to raise a child, I think those are foundational courses that all kids in our state need to take before they graduate. So thank you.
Anyone else? I think the only thing I would say, because I agree with all of this, and if I had my way, we'd fund all CTE, right? Because I'm a CTE guy. Schools would just be CTE. Makes a lot of sense. But I feel a little bit of virtue signaling going on that I think we need to discuss, because this was not done in the isolation that I think some people think, and I feel compelled to talk about that. If you don't agree with the decision, that's fine, because there were things that came out of there that I didn't necessarily agree with, right? But I think the process involved in employers, it involved educators, it involved 2 people off the Department of Education, Amanda McGammond and Stephanie Deckert at the time. And I think at times we had more people there from that. We had Vincennes, Ivy Tech, and all of those that were involved in that went from that action team to the governor's workforce cabinet that then ultimately moved that recommendation to the legislature, which actually passed that last spring, correct? And so I think, you mentioned that, but I think it's important because while if we agree or disagree, and I so agree with Gail's comments that the process is part of it that we need to work on, right? I mean, I really get that part, but I don't want people to think that the people that were discussing this took a long time to discuss, because I was on that action team and I remember people talking about, hey, we would like every kid to take these courses. That's really part of the reason why it ended up how it did, because if we had every single kid take it, all of a sudden we've eaten up our 130 million, right? So while some of those things need to get worked out, I just feel compelled to say, I don't like the feeling of, hey, this was done to try to hurt somebody or because somebody just didn't study or think about this, right? I want to make sure that you understand that was very deliberate, and there has been some time here. And again, like I said, there were things that came out of there. PJ will tell you that I fought hard and didn't like along the way. But that's, again, I go back to something I said at the last meeting. It's kind of democracy, and that's the way it works, right? And so I just felt compelled to say that, and I appreciate, and again, I agree with most of the things that have been said, right? But I think I don't want people to think that this was done in total isolation of thought process of that, or care for those courses, because I think people really did value them.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anybody else?
That's all. Everyone have a happy new year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move to approve CTE recommendation.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded to approve the CTE recommendation. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, call roll call.
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Rentschler,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Aye.
Mr. Watts.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Okay, motion carries. I believe that is all of our new business on the agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor? Meeting adjourned.
Aye.